Hey guys, tonight we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful dynasties in European history. You're probably familiar with the stories of Henry VIII's promiscuity or the sharp intellect of Elizabeth I. But sometimes history is obscured by glamorous tales. Have you ever wondered what truly shaped England's most brutal king? Could terrifying secrets from his own family have turned him into a tyrant? We will delve into a forgotten tragedy, a loss that has silently sowed an obsession for centuries. It is the death of 3 royal children that history itself seems unwilling to remember. A lavish funeral for one princess, a prince buried without a tombstone, and a life so brief it didn't even make it into official history. These deaths were not just personal tragedies. They are a chilling explanation for the obsession with succession that shaped Henry VIII's every decision, every conflict, and every marital tragedy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please comment below to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It helps us connect with each other. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When we think of the Tudor dynasty, our minds instantly conjure the image of Henry VIII with his 6 illustrious wives, or the brilliant splendor of Elizabeth I's reign. Yet hidden in the shadows of history is a far more tragic tale. 3 little angels, the children of Henry VII, and Elizabeth of York, who were born only to depart this life before they could leave their footprints on the velvet halls of the palace. These fragile lives, though they existed for only a fleeting moment, revealed to us how precarious the Tudor line truly was in the years of the 1490s to the early 16th century. Now, we will explore the journey of Henry VII, the king who laid the foundation for this dynasty, and review his 6 children with Elizabeth of York, among whom 3 precious seedlings, Elizabeth, Edmund, and Catherine, passed away too soon, so that we may understand why the Tudor throne was often rocked by the pressures of birth and death. Henry VII officially married Elizabeth of York in January, in the year 1486, bringing to a close the prolonged civil war between the Lancastrian and Yorkist branches. Less than 8 months later, in September in the year 1486, Prince Arthur cried his first cry, named for the legendary King Arthur, to affirm the unity and enduring strength of the new dynasty. That event brought radiant hope, yet it also sparked a constant anxiety, for disease and illness always lurked in the damp, ancient palace chambers. Over the following 16 years, Elizabeth of York gave birth to 6 more children. Princess Margaret, born in November, in the year 1489, named for her grandmother, Duchess Margaret Beaufort. Prince Henry, born in June in the year 1491, named for his father to emphasize the continuity of the bloodline. Princess Elizabeth, born in July in the year 1492, a comfort after the hardships of childbirth. Princess Mary, born in March in the year 1496, named for the Virgin Mary in the hope of divine protection. Prince Edmund, born in February in the year 1499, named for his grandfather Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond. Princess Catherine, born in February in the year 1503, possibly named for Princess Catherine of York, or for her sister-in-law Catherine of Aragon, or perhaps for both. Although rumours once circulated of a Prince Edward, in truth that was merely a misunderstanding of Edmund's name. Ironically, 3 of these 6 children, Princess Elizabeth, Prince Edmund, and Princess Catherine, could not survive infancy. They departed this world in the arms of the royal nursery nurses before they could ever step from their wooden cradles or leave their mark on the palace gates. Saddest of all, their deaths occurred in the exact order of their births. First Princess Elizabeth, the 4th daughter, then Prince Edmund, and finally Princess Catherine. And now, let us explore the first ill-fated child of King Henry VII, the monarch who founded the Tudor dynasty and was also the father of Henry VIII, namely Princess Elizabeth. Princess Elizabeth was the 4th child of King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York. She was conceived only 3 months after Prince Henry, her 3rd sibling, was born, making the two nearly the same age, with less than a year between them. On the night of the 2nd of July in the year 1492, at Sheen Palace, later renamed Richmond Palace, the clear cry of baby Elizabeth echoed through the warm chamber, ushering in a new chapter of hope for the fledgling Tudor dynasty. Immediately after her birth, Princess Elizabeth was moved to the royal nursery, where her sister Princess Margaret and brother Prince Henry were already in residence. There she was entrusted to a nurse named Cecily Burbage, who received £10 a year and attended her day and night with devoted care. Alongside Cecily, a team of attendants and maids created a tranquil little world in which children's laughter blended with soft lullabies, echoing through the cool, stone-flagged corridors. Beneath the high-vaulted roof of the royal nursery, Elizabeth grew up amid gentle lullabies and simple games. She would often grasp Prince Henry's finger and giggle as he guided her through each corner of the small garden, then crawl back to the window to watch the first light of dawn dance across the white walls. Occasionally, Princess Margaret would sit beside her and recount stories of the rose gardens in their grandmother Duchess Margaret Beaufort's abbey, allowing Elizabeth to imagine a vast world beyond the cold fortress walls. But that joy was not to last. On the 14th of September, in the year 1495, just after her third birthday, Elizabeth suddenly fell ill at Eltham Palace. There is no record of any lingering illness, only a swift malady that claimed the fragile life. Heartbreaking news spread swiftly through the court, replacing every song and laughter with billowing incense smoke and unceasing prayers. King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York were inconsolable. They ordered the grandest funeral for their daughter. According to the 17th century chronicler Francis Sandford, Princess Elizabeth's body was embalmed in wax, wrapped in fine cerecloth, and placed in a coffin lined with pure gold. The coffin was draped with a golden cloth embroidered with the Tudor, rose the dynasty's emblem, and set upon a horse-drawn hearse pulled by 6 stately horses, complete with a canopy and 4 banners representing the Holy Trinity, the Virgin Mary, St. George, and the royal arms of England. Her casket lay in state in the King's Chapel at Eltham for 11 days, during which each day saw the dirige and the requiem mass performed. The resonance of chanting, the tolling of bells, and the quiet accompaniment of instruments created an atmosphere both sacred and mournful. On the 11th day, the funeral cortege carried Elizabeth's remains from Eltham to Westminster Abbey, where the monks received her with solemn procession at the gate. Following the final rites, the princess was interred to the right of the altar, just before the shrine of St. Edward. There, a small tomb of black marble, inlaid with brass, was erected, topped by a gilt bronze effigy of the princess with a serene expression. A Latin inscription praised her lineage. Elizabeth, illustrious daughter of Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York, born on the 2nd day of July in the year of our Lord 1492, died on the 14th day of September, in the year of our Lord 1495. May God support her soul. The total cost of the funeral, including the ceremony, coffin, hearse and tomb, amounted to £318, an enormous sum for the time. Beyond their profound love, the lavish display served a clear political purpose: to affirm the legitimacy of the Tudor line, barely a decade old and beset by pretenders to the throne. A magnificent funeral and a royal burial at Westminster Abbey, the resting place of kings and queens, helped solidify the image of a rightful royal family, worthy of the crown that Henry VII and Elizabeth of York had fought to establish. In the final hush, as incense smoke drifted upward and the Tudor rose banners fluttered softly in the breeze, Eltham Palace seemed to hold its breath in mourning. Princess Elizabeth, the smallest angel of the dynasty, had departed, leaving a void no heart could fill, both in her parents' sorrow and across the realm. Though her story was fleeting, it imprinted itself indelibly on Tudor history, a solemn reminder that no throne, however glorious, can stand against the fragile nature of life. Thus, the tragedy of Princess Elizabeth came to a close amid boundless grief, leaving an unfillable void in the hearts of King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York. Yet the sorrow did not end there, for fate would once again call upon the Tudor line in the form of another child. Soon after Princess Elizabeth, the kingdom would witness the departure of Prince Edmund, the 5th Prince and the next hope for the throne. Next, I invite you to join me in exploring the brief yet meaningful life of Prince Edmund. At the beginning of the year 1498, Queen Elizabeth of York was once again with child, carrying the Tudor dynasty's hopes for a male heir. On the 21st of February in the year 1499, at around 6 o'clock in the evening, the faint cry of Prince Edmund rang out at Greenwich Palace. Edmund's arrival, the third son of King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York, quickly became the second joyous announcement after Princess Elizabeth, though barely 4 years separated the two sorrowful chapters. Just 3 days after his first birthday, Prince Edmund's baptism was celebrated with solemn ceremony at Greyfriars Church. A font from Canterbury had been transported by John Davy, who received 6 shillings and 8 pence for the journey, plus a gratuity of £2 for the friar overseeing the rite. His godparents, the Duke of Buckingham, the Bishop of Durham, and his grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, held Edmund aloft at the font, establishing his future title, Duke of Somerset. The Tudor court's long-standing tradition was once again honoured, like a hymn of blessing for peace and prosperity. Shortly thereafter, Edmund was returned to the royal nursery, where a nurse named Alice Skerne, who had previously cared for Princess Mary, took over his upbringing. Every tentative step and babbling utterance was met by Alice's gentle gaze and warm hands. In that peaceful enclave, Edmund grew up beside his brother, Prince Henry, and his sister Margaret, exploring the stone-flagged corridors where candlelight flickered on the walls, like small sparks of hope within the ever-turning wheel of royalty. Yet tragedy struck again when Edmund reached only 15 months of age. At Bishop's Hatfield in Hertfordshire, he slipped away one unheralded afternoon, like a breeze passing through a rose garden, leaving only a fading scent behind. No record speaks of a protracted illness. Few could have imagined that the once robust child would succumb to a sudden malady so swiftly that his parents and the court were left unprepared. Shortly afterward, in May or June of the year 1501, the court accounts recorded a payment of £342, 11 shillings, and 8 pence for the funeral at Westminster Abbey. However, the precise date of his death is often given as the 19th of June in the year 1501, a discrepancy likely due to a printing error. Yet one fact remains clear. Unlike his sister Elizabeth, Edmund received no grand monument. There was no elaborately carved tomb, no gilt bronze effigy, only a simple grave near the shrine of St. Edward the Confessor, where grass grew through the stone. The conspicuous absence of a public memorial for Edmund was startling, for at that time a prince typically received more honour than a princess. This omission invites reflection. Was a male heir considered so dispensable, or did the hurried nature of mourning leave no time for commemorative architecture? Whatever the reason, Edmund's death bore even greater dynastic weight than Princess Elizabeth's. Had he lived, he might have served as the sole male contingency for the throne during the reign of his brother Henry VIII, sparing the monarchy from anxiety over male succession. We can only imagine how close the two princes, Henry and Edmund, might have been, growing up almost as twins under their parents' care. Yet Edmund's tragic passing underscored a harsh reality. The Tudor line was as fragile as silk, vulnerable to both political storms and sudden illness. It was Edmund's abrupt departure that later drove Henry VIII's relentless quest for a surviving son, compelling him to reshape beliefs and institutions to avoid repeating such loss. In the silent vaults of Westminster Abbey, after the funeral procession had long departed, only the wind whispered beneath ancient arches. Prince Edmund's story echoed as an endless reminder. No throne, however magnificently adorned, can withstand the fragility of life. And so tragedy followed tragedy, etching into Tudor history unspoken sorrows that left forever unfillable voids. Thus, after the tragedy of Prince Edmund, the grief of the Tudor dynasty seemed without end. Scarcely had Edmund departed when calamity struck again. For Prince Arthur, the eldest son and foremost hope for succession of King Henry, VII unexpectedly died at Ludlow in April 1502. In that sombre, weighty atmosphere, Queen Elizabeth of York became pregnant once more, as though fate itself continued to test her resilience. Amid loss and despair, the court still dared to hope for a new miracle. And now, I invite you to join me as we step into the next chapter of this Tudor tragedy, to meet the third ill-fated child of King Henry VII, Princess Catherine, and continue our journey through the mounting losses that befell this dynasty. In November, in the year 1501, Prince Arthur, the firstborn son and foremost hope of King Henry VII, was wed to Princess Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess admired throughout Europe for her refined beauty and virtue. The lavish wedding took place at the Tower of London, witnessed by the assembled nobility and elder statesmen, marking a landmark alliance between England and the Mediterranean realm. Yet less than 5 months after their marriage, fate struck again. In April in the year 1502, Prince Arthur suddenly died at Ludlow. The dreadful news fell like thunder, causing the court to collapse in an instant, when its primary heir, the prince chosen to be king, was lost forever. Both King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York were plunged into inconsolable grief. The palace was shrouded in mourning, with wind bells tolling day and night, as though the royal household had lost all warmth. Amid this anguish, Queen Elizabeth, with steadfast courage, gripped her husband's hand and whispered that they were still young and could welcome new miracles. Those words shone like a single candle in the darkness, renewing hope in both monarchs that the Tudor line would not be easily extinguished. Less than a year later, Queen Elizabeth of York again found herself with child. By early in the year 1503, she retired to the maternity suite at the Tower of London, a building once known for its grandeur, now transformed into a chamber draped in silken canopies, velvet blankets, and the faint aroma of incense. Each heartbeat of the life within her womb became a bridge between past sorrow and future promise, stirring gentle hope in those who had endured such suffering. On the 2nd of February in the year 1503, as the gilded clock in her chamber chimed the 6th hour, Queen Elizabeth gave birth to a healthy baby daughter. The clear cry of Princess Catherine echoed through the silent halls of the Tower of London, like a new hymn of praise for the Tudor dynasty. Though the birth of a daughter might once have been considered a minor disappointment since a prince was thought a more certain guarantee for the throne, the court regarded the birth of any living child as a precious miracle. However, joy proved fleeting. Queen Elizabeth was unable to recover from the childbirth. In fewer than 10 days, she, the steadfast mother and unifying force, passed away on her 37th birthday. On the 11th of February, the palace resounded with choked sobs as the simple hearse bearing her coffin was borne through the cold stone corridors. The loss of her mother compounded the grief of little Princess Catherine, who was barely 2 weeks old. The precise details of Princess Catherine's death remain unclear. No contemporary record specifies the date of her passing, only that she departed shortly after her mother, during the family's darkest days. The historian Polydore Virgil, writing in the early reign of Henry VIII, offered only a brief note. The infant lived but a few days. She may have been born prematurely or been weakened by complications of birth, her fragile body unable to withstand the ordeal. Nevertheless, that sorrow was deeply felt by all who witnessed it. A human life, a little princess, born only to depart before ever knowing the throne. Like her 2 older siblings, Princess Catherine was interred in Westminster Abbey, beside the chapel of St. Edward the Confessor. Yet she was given no memorial stone, no inlaid brass monument, nor a painted tapestry depicting her brief life. Her grave remains an unmarked spot among the many royal tombs, location unknown, without sign or emblem. This absence underscores the fragility of power and the inequity of remembrance. A prince or princess who grows to maturity may be immortalized, while a child who never reaches childhood can be all but forgotten. These 3 little angels, Elizabeth, Edmund, and Catherine, forever closed the first chapter of Tudor fate. They departed at pivotal moments, leaving boundless sorrow and a mournful message. No throne, no matter how splendid, can fully shelter the fragile flame of life. Their passing proved to the Tudor court that military might and diplomacy alone do not determine a kingdom's destiny. Human life itself is a decisive factor. In the empty arms of a mother now gone, beside an unmarked grave, Princess Catherine, the final angel of this tragic trilogy, etched into history a lesson on life and death, reminding future generations that even the greatest dynasty cannot escape its wounds. Although their first 3 children would never reach maturity, King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York wished to immortalize their family image with enduring solemnity. Thus, between the years 1503 and 1509, His Majesty commissioned a grand painting in the Flemish style, suitable as a devotional poster or for display in the Longmore Hall. This masterpiece transcended mere portraiture. It served as the dynasty's talisman, reminding all that the Tudor line was legitimate and everlasting. In the composition, King Henry VII is positioned on the left, clad in an opulent robe, wearing a crown and a precious metal pendant, his hands folded at his breast in prayer. Beside him stand his 3 sons, depicted as young adults despite their varied fates. Prince Arthur, the firstborn heir, Prince Henry, the next in line, and Prince Edmund, who had perished in infancy. Even though Edmund never grew to adulthood, the artist rendered his face with delicate refinement, asserting that every life in the family was sacred, however fleeting. Opposite them stands Queen Elizabeth of York in dignified grace, wearing a cloak embroidered with Tudor roses, a modest crown upon her brow, and her hands likewise clasped in prayer. Surrounding her are her 4 daughters: Princess Margaret, Princess Elizabeth, Princess Mary, and Princess Catherine. Each princess is portrayed as a youthful maiden of 16 or 17 years, though Margaret and Mary would indeed live to adulthood, and Elizabeth and Catherine would not, but in the painting all possess gentle beauty, ivory skin, and dreamy gazes hinting at profound reflection. Between the male and female groupings hovers a celestial angel, wings outstretched, bearing a rose and a jewel in hand. This ethereal figure suggests that although 3 young souls did not survive, their spirits remain sheltered in heaven's embrace. In the backdrop, St. George, the patron saint of England, is shown slaying a fierce dragon. This scene amplifies the painting's message. Under divine protection, the Tudor lineage will conquer all adversity. All figures wear long robes elegantly lifted to reveal fur linings of rare quality and skirts trimmed with pearl-like beads. The crowns, though similar in form, differ in intricate ornamentation and precious metal composition, each designating rank and authority. Their pendants are not mere adornments but royal symbols. The Tudor rose intertwined with fruit clusters signifying abundance and prosperity. Executed in oil on linen, the painting's palette is composed of warm browns, deep blues of the cloaks, golden highlights, and milky whites of flesh, harmonious without harshness, inducing a serene, almost drowsy state in the viewer. Light descends from above, illuminating the faces and crowns, while casting soft shadows throughout, evoking sanctity. Though King Henry VII was renowned as a cautious, calculating man with a love of wealth, this painting reveals a heart capable of deep affection. He sought not only to display power, but also to memorialize the lost Elizabeth, Edmund, and Catherine through their luminous portrayals. For the viewer, the artwork is a poignant reminder of love and loss. What Henry, VII, and Elizabeth of York sacrificed to uphold the throne, and the silent martyrdom of their little angels. This work may also hint at why Prince Henry the Future, Henry VIII, so desperately yearned for a legitimate son of his own. Gazing upon the painting, the young prince's compassion and resolve would have been galvanized by the vision of his departed siblings and the sorrow etched upon his parents' faces. In his half-dreams and weary breaths after days of warfare, Henry VIII surely contemplated his duty to continue the line and his hope for a child whose life would endure, unlike his 3 ill-fated brothers and sister. Thus, the Flemish family portrait is not merely an artistic creation, but a tragic anthem, a reminder that, however splendid power may be, however secure the crown, life remains precarious at history's threshold. Amid the soft clinking of goblets and the hushed breaths of night, the image of the 7 Tudor members, 4 survivors, and 3 lost endures, teaching us that memory and love are the only immortal miracles. The successive deaths of 3 infant princes and princesses left an indelible mark on Prince Henry's mind, he who would later become Henry VIII, a haunting obsession. From earliest childhood, Henry heard tales of his siblings' fragility. Princess Elizabeth's grand funeral without a memorial stone, Prince Edmund's unmarked fate, and Princess Catherine's silent departure with no recorded date of death. Each story tightened his heart as he imagined the palace cloaked in mourning, incense smoke swirling, requiem music echoing through the chapel. Witnessing Princess Elizabeth's lavish funeral, every ritual stage, orchestrated to broadcast legitimacy and bolster royal authority, only to find no monument for Edmund or Catherine, Henry gradually perceived power's cruel irony. Solemn ceremony can conceal pain, but never banish it. The boy wondered, if even his own life could not guarantee his siblings' survival, how secure was the throne? That question pierced him like a dagger, igniting a fierce desire for a son, a true heir, not merely a symbol. As he matured and entered marriage, Henry VIII carried that burden into every negotiation with Catherine of Aragon. Each time the Queen became pregnant, he stood in anxious anticipation, only to be repeatedly disappointed by daughters or infants who did not survive the first month. His anguish deepened whenever he gazed upon the Flemish family portrait his father had commissioned, the spectres of his 3 lost siblings standing beside their parents, hands folded in prayer. The painting spoke without words. The Tudor line was so fragile that 3 blossoms had already wilted, and without a surviving son, history might repeat itself. By the time of his marriage to Anne Boleyn, the pressure to produce a male heir had become a political obsession. Henry's longing for continuity merged with a determination to prove to Europe that the English crown, independent of the Roman Church, was more secure. His break with the papacy and establishment of the Church of England, though driven by political and financial motives, were profoundly shaped by his fear of dynastic collapse. He believed no authority was more sacred than a father's right to a son heir. Replacing his wife became the sole method to seek a surviving prince, and he did so unhesitatingly, despite the catastrophic cost to his reputation and religious stability. From a psychological perspective, the losses of his youth activated in Henry VIII a desperate hunger for restitution, to conjure a miracle that would redeem his 3 departed siblings, and to repay his parents' endless tears. Simultaneously, the dread of a broken succession fueled his willingness to protect his own power by any means necessary. He became resolute, even ruthless in every decree to avoid repeating his father's tragedy. When contemplating the Flemish family portrait, Henry VIII surely recognized how tenuous the Tudor line had been. The 3 youthful faces, so pure yet vanished, hovered like ghosts, reminding him that power is no cloak against wounds. This realization propelled him to eliminate every latent threat to succession, from schism with Rome to the execution of a queen and the overturning of ancient precedents. Each political maneuver, seemingly strategic, sprang from a deep-seated fear that a crown cannot endure without an heir. In the king's drowsy dreams, the images of his 3 little siblings persisted, small angels extinguished at life's threshold, a warning to anyone who dreamed of an eternal monarchy. And Henry VIII, in the weary half-sleep at day's end, must have imagined that only a robust, legitimate son could grant him the peace to sleep, freeing him from the terror of once again seeing the Tudor line consumed by fate's merciless flame. Throughout the 15th to the 16th century, the English throne was constantly imperiled from many directions, foreign invaders at the gates, and civil strife within its walls. But an even more insidious threat lurked in the shadows, the dark forces of pretenders like Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be the son of Edward IV. Confronted with these dangers, King Henry VII did not hesitate to employ every measure to affirm the Tudor dynasty's legitimacy, including lavish funeral rites for its youngest members. The embalming rituals where the royal child was treated with wax, swathed in cerecloth, and laid in a coffin lined with gold, were more than mere mortuary customs. They conveyed a clear political message. Though still tender shoots, the Tudors were entitled to be honoured as monarchs. The triumphal funeral procession, with its square banners emblazoned with the royal arms, gilded canopy, and 6 horses drawing the hearse, created an awe-inspiring spectacle of power. Burying Princess Elizabeth at Westminster Abbey, the traditional resting place of English kings, reinforced the same sentiment. Westminster Abbey, a symbol of the inviolability of the crown, became the final sanctuary for an infant, sending a potent signal. The Tudor line was inseparable from the traditions and rituals of monarchy, unshakable by any challenger. But funeral pomp alone was not enough. Henry VII also commissioned a grand family portrait in the Flemish style, depicting father, mother, and all 7 children, including the 3 little angels who had passed side by side in prayer. This masterpiece served not only to adorn the Longimore Hall, but also as a propaganda tool, demonstrating that royal authority was underpinned by faith and art, thereby discouraging any doubts about its rightful rule. Memorial services and commemorative anniversaries were also held with solemn grandeur in the King's Chapel, featuring the dirige and requiem masses over several days. The chanting, bell tolls, and wafting incense created an environment both sacred and politically potent, dispelling rumours and thwarting the plots of potential enemies. By candlelight and in the hushed breaths of the court, every ritual from the funeral cortege, winding along stone corridors to the placement of coffins beneath the statue of St. Edward the Confessor, was meticulously staged so that nobles and commoners alike would understand. The Tudor reign was not merely a new regime but a destiny ordained by heaven. Henry VII skillfully employed Roman Catholic devotions, celebrating the saints and harnessing the church's imagery to reinforce his authority. He did not shy away from using religious ceremony as a political strategy, cautioning any who dared challenge the throne. Simultaneously, art and architecture were marshalled to support the dynasty. VIII Palace was renovated with additional chapels and monuments, so that every garden, corner and corridor bore witness to Tudor permanence, and every visitor would sense the power and prosperity of a new dynasty. Gradually, these rituals became emblems of power. The populace beheld the splendid processions, heard the royal presence echo through the abbey, and reassured themselves that the court was unbreakable. Rumours of pretenders like Perkin Warbeck diminished, for all believed the Tudor family was under God's and history's protection. To the European nobility, these ceremonies also affirmed the English crown now possessed a clear lineage and solemn rights, ready for dynastic marriages or diplomatic alliances on equal terms. Henry VII used mourning and celebration as soft weapons, commanding respect across the continent. Of course, no measure could entirely erase personal grief. Looking upon the row of princesses' graves or the family portrait that kept the memory of the 3 lost infants alive, Henry VII must have felt a quiet pang. The throne is fragile, human life is fragile, and even a dynasty's survival depended on rituals, mourning, and art. When night fell, and the palace lay silent, with only the incense's dying embers, one realized, however majestic monarchy may seem, it relies on faith and memory. And thanks to these solemn rituals, the Tudor dynasty etched its name into history, unblurred amid the tumultuous currents of English kingship. Throughout this narrative, we observe that the Tudor dynasty had scarcely been established for 2 decades, before enduring its 3 most heart-rending losses, 3 little angels slipping away within the embrace of their own family. This series of tragedies reminds us of how fragile both power and life can be, even for those sheltered within opulent palace walls. King Henry VII's refusal to let Edmund and Catherine be forgotten, enshrining their images in that grand Flemish portrait, despite the absence of tombstones, reveals his understanding that remembrance itself can keep a life alive in the five and the five-and, heart of a lineage. At the same time, Prince Henry, who would later become Henry VIII, witnessed those funerals and studied the faces of his lost siblings in the family painting. He bore a monumental historical responsibility to rule the kingdom and to ensure that the Tudor bloodline would not be severed. Those early life tragedies etched themselves deeply into his psyche, shaping his future reign in profound ways. He would stop at nothing to preserve the lineage, even if it meant clashing with the church or condemning his own wife. From the moment Henry observed the grand procession for Princess Elizabeth, he understood that ceremony could mask sorrow, but never dispel it. Each funeral rite he saw the waxen embalming, the gold-lined coffin, the banners fluttering beneath cathedral arches taught him that power demands spectacle. Yet spectacle cannot fill the void left by a single small life. When the hour came for Edmund's brief burial, Henry watched as his parents spent £342, 11 shillings, and 8 pence to inter the little prince at Westminster Abbey, and he noted that despite the expense, no ornate memorial rose to mark the spot. And when Princess Catherine took her fleeting breath, he felt a profound emptiness at her unmarked grave beside St. Edward's shrine. These losses, occurring in the order of their births, as if fate itself had arranged it, imparted on young Henry a sense of urgency. If those children could vanish before reaching maturity, his own place in history might be similarly precarious. Growing up, Henry's education was interwoven with these sombre lessons. Tutors read him tales of legacy and the divine right of kings, but also of human frailty and mortality. In the hushed glow of candlelight, he would gaze at the Flemish family portrait commissioned by his father between 1503 and 1509, studying the angelic countenances of children who never grew to adulthood. There, standing between his parents, were his 3 lost siblings, each painted as a graceful adolescent, hands clasped in prayer. Henry knew that the portrait did more than glorify his bloodline. It immortalized lives that the grave had claimed too soon. It was a silent declaration. These children were as royal as any king, and their memory must endure. As he moved into manhood and entered the royal marriage bed, Henry carried that silent vow. With Catherine of Aragon, every pregnancy became a test of destiny. He prayed nightly, pacing the corridors of Richmond Palace, hoping the next cry he heard would be a male heir's. Each time he saw Catherine's rounded belly, he He felt the weight of Tudor survival upon his shoulders. When another daughter was born, or when an infant died before his first Candlemas, Henry's heart ached not only for his wife's sorrow, but also for the precarious future of his realm. He recalled how his grandfather Henry VII had staged lavish funerals and tomb placements to assert legitimacy, and he knew that if he could not secure a son, he would be forced to confront the spectre of dynastic collapse, a fear that would drive him to radical measures. Henry's eventual break with the Roman Church and establishment of the Church of England had many political and financial motivations, but at its core lay his profound need to guarantee succession. He believed, with almost religious fervour, that no institution could match the sanctity of a father's right to a son heir. By divorcing Catherine and marrying Anne Boleyn, he sought that miracle child who would bind the Tudor line together. When Anne's daughters were born and Anne herself fell victim to court intrigue, Henry's actions grew ever more desperate, executing queens, rewriting canon law, and suppressing dissent. Each step, though cloaked in the language of statecraft, was fueled by the same dread that had stalked him since infancy. The dread that without a living male heir, the Tudor legacy might once again be swept away. In the quiet depths of his later years, when Henry confronted his own mortality, he must have remembered those three little angels over and over. He who had once been a robust young prince grew corpulent and infirm, but still he obsessed over his sole surviving son, Edward, later Edward VI, urging him to ensure the crown's continuity. He built grand chapels and endowed intercessory masses, yet none could fill the emptiness carved by Elizabeth, Edmund, and Catherine's premature passings. The court whispered that the king's melancholy was born of these early wounds, that his fear of dynastic extinction drove his moral rigidity and merciless decrees. Thus, the Tudor story teaches us that the mightiest throne can dwell atop the most fragile foundation, human life itself. The memory of 3 infant deaths shaped a prince into a king both mighty and tragic, whose greatest battles were waged not on distant fields, but within his own heart. In the twilight hush of Hampton Court, beneath the glow of medieval vaults, one can almost hear the faint echo of small voices. Voices that, though silenced by time, speak still of the impermanence at the core of power. And Henry VIII, in his final drowsy reflections, may have understood at last that no crown, however jewelled, can ever guard against the inexorable toll of loss. And so, the 3 Tudor saplings, Princess Elizabeth, Prince Edmund, and Princess Catherine, closed the tragic chapter of King Henry VII's life, siblings whom Henry VIII knew only through wistful recollections and the distant tolling of requiem bells. From memories of 2 empty cradles and the Flemish family portrait, Prince Henry grew into a young man bearing an unquenchable longing for immortal life. Now, as he ascends the throne, that ancient lesson rings like a persistent reminder. The fragile fate of royal children imposes upon him a dual responsibility to govern the kingdom and to carry forward the Tudor bloodline. And in his turbulent reign to come, we shall explore the stories of King Henry VIII's own children, fresh saplings, tasked with the weighty duty of succession and the continuation of the Tudor legacy. Please join me in exploring the sole heir of Henry VIII, Prince Edward, the child king distinguished by a brief but tumultuous life. On a drizzly early winter's night at Greenwich Palace, the clear cry of a newborn prince rang out. On the 26th of November in the year 1503, Princess Catherine, now Queen, gave birth to Prince Edward, the 3rd son, and the only surviving hope of King Henry VIII. The moment his first wail sounded, court officials prepared the birth ceremonies. Brass trumpets boomed throughout the Scarlet Towers, horses draped in royal banners thundered across the tiled courtyard, and 6 heralds with their retinues escorted a palanquin bearing the happy news across London. The royal ritual did not end there. According to court protocol, a golden banner emblazoned with the Tudor arms was paraded from Westminster Palace to Greenwich, where it was displayed outside the birth chamber as a symbol of unbroken authority. Once the prince's sex was confirmed, the court held the investiture of apparel. 32 royal garments were successively draped upon the infant to signify his future titles and privileges. Finally, a salvo of cannon fire heralded his arrival, thundering down the main thoroughfare as the proclamation, "Prince Edward is born, and the Tudor line continues." From the moment he was wrapped in swaddling clothes, Edward was created Duke of Cornwall, the traditional title for the heir to the English throne. Upon his 2nd birthday, He was additionally titled Prince of Wales, cementing his place in the succession. These august honours brought vast estates, a private palace, and a royal treasury to support his every need, from sumptuous robes to a retinue of stewards and guards. During his childhood, Edward grew beneath the soaring arches of the royal nursery, where lullabies accompanied his earliest lessons. Renowned tutors such as Sir John Check and Sir William Cecil took turns instructing him in Latin scripture, the art of poetry, natural philosophy, and humanist ethics. He was also taken on tours of royal landmarks, hearing stories of dynastic history and European tradition, so that from infancy he absorbed the then novel concept that the king is the people's servant. Not long after, on the 28th of September in the year 1509, still not yet 6 years old, Edward was formally crowned in a candlelit coronation at Westminster Abbey. The child king, robed in gilded cloth and wearing a weighty crown, received oaths of fealty from nobles and prelates. Though hurried due to his tender age, the ceremony maintained its solemn grandeur, with the Archbishop of Canterbury officiating Holy Mass and pronouncing blessings. Upon becoming King Edward VI, the young monarch witnessed his council urgently drafting and enacting new ecclesiastical laws for the Church of England. Under the guidance of his close advisers Thomas Cranmer and Thomas Wyatt, Edward VI affixed his name to the Act of Religious Freedom, declaring that the English Church would embrace Protestant reforms, abolishing Roman ceremonies and doctrines. Though Edward was still a child, the court recognized that royal authority transcended years. Yet King Edward VI's life would not be long. Ceremonial splendor and sovereign power could not conceal his frail frame and weak constitution. Just after his 15th birthday, he contracted pulmonary tuberculosis, a then incurable disease. From Whitehall to Greenwich, the royal hospitals were thrown into crisis. Eminent physicians, clerics, and even folk healers were summoned to the palace. But all efforts proved in vain. Finally, on the 6th of February in the year 1519, King Edward VI breathed his last upon his bed of state. Once more, palace corridors echoed with the blare of trumpets as the royal hearse conveyed his body under incense and prayer. The boy king was interred with solemnity at Westminster Abbey, alongside the ancient tombs where the siblings of Henry VII had rested. It was the most lavish funeral ever held for so young a monarch, with enormous expense and boundless mourning. Edward VI's legacy lies not in his brief years, but in his pioneering zeal for Protestant reform. Under his reign, the Church of England was radically reshaped, laying the foundation for subsequent monarchs. Though he never lived to see the full fruits of his reforms, history remembers him king at 15 as the bearer of the torch that rekindled religion and secured the future of the English throne. Please join me as we explore the tragic life and reign of Queen Mary I, later known by the epithet Bloody Mary, to understand how her obsession with succession and religious faith shaped her destiny. Queen Mary I was born on the 1st of February in the year 1506, the only surviving daughter of King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine of Aragon. From her earliest years, Mary grew up amid seismic upheaval. Her parents' divorce stripped her mother of her royal title and removed Mary herself from the line of succession. Losing her mother as a toddler and bearing witness to a religious crisis within her own family, Mary carried in her heart both bitterness and an unyielding desire to restore her lost position. Mary's relationship with her half-brother, Prince Edward, was fraught with conflict. Edward was at once the living testament to their mother's honour, and the one who dashed Mary's hopes of inheriting the throne when he assumed kingship as a child. When Edward VI began to implement Protestant reforms, Mary felt profoundly betrayed, and her steadfast loyalty to Roman Catholicism became her very creed. It was said at court that each time she heard of Edward's injunctions against Roman rights, Mary wept and vowed to repay the Church of Rome in blood when she ascended the throne. Upon her own accession in the year 1544, Mary moved decisively to enact her vow. Though her reign lasted fewer than 5 years, Mary I swiftly restored papal allegiance, reinstated Catholic ceremonies, and launched a purge of heretics. Hundreds clergy of the Reformed Church, scholars who supported the reforms, and nobles who remained loyal to Edward were condemned to the stake in the name of religious purity. These exiles became known as the Marian Exiles, and Mary earned the sobriquet Bloody Mary, a title reflecting both her ruthless methods and the personal anguish that drove them. Amid the suffocating political climate, Mary sought a lasting alliance through marriage to Philip II of Spain, aiming to reinforce Catholic power and hoping for a male heir. Their wedding was a lavish spectacle, a dazzling night of celebration uniting two kingdoms. But Mary's affection for Philip did not match her expectations. She yearned for a son to heal her childhood wounds, but fate denied her. Mary experienced at least one pregnancy that ended in miscarriage and ultimately died without issue, leaving the English throne once again in crisis. The consequences of her religious policies and obsession with succession were manifold. Thousands of her Catholic subjects were forced into exile, creating the Marian exile movement across Europe. These exiles later played a pivotal role in reintroducing Protestantism to England. Mary's ferocity made Europe take heed. The Tudor bloodline was literally washed in fire, teaching a bitter lesson about the perils of power entwined with fanatical faith. Mary I's legacy is, in hindsight, complex. On one hand, she laboured to restore fidelity to the Roman Church and protect the rights of English Catholics. On the other, her repressive religious measures sowed deep social division and further destabilised the Tudor dynasty. The image of Queen Bloody endures as a cautionary tale. Unchecked power, when stained with blood, loses its humanity and leaves wounds that time cannot heal. From her warped childhood of divorce and loss to her brief, blood-soaked reign, Mary I's life illustrates how an obsession with lineage and faith can lead a sovereign down a harsh path. In this section, we see that beneath the title of Queen lay a heart lost in the storm of power, and that personal pain can drive decisions that terrorize an entire realm. Please join me as we explore the turbulent and glorious life of Queen Elizabeth I, who overcame a difficult beginning to etch her name into history with the Elizabethan Golden Age. Elizabeth Tudor was born on the 23rd of September, in the year 1502, as Princess Elizabeth of York. However, when her father, King Henry VIII, divorced Anne Boleyn to marry Jane Seymour, Elizabeth was stripped of her princess title, and her position became precarious. Amid the political and religious whirlwind, Mary I's half-sister narrowly survived the purge following Anne Boleyn's execution, witnessing the disappearance of those once close to the court. Nearly twice, she faced royal displeasure, teaching Elizabeth from an early age how to evade peril and cementing in her a fierce instinct for survival. Elizabeth's exceptional education laid the foundation for her later glory. She mastered Latin and Greek as a child, then studied French, Italian, and Spanish, an extraordinary achievement for a woman of that era. Leading tutors, including Roger Ascham and William Grindal, instructed her in scripture, classical literature, mathematics, and music. Elizabeth absorbed humanist ideas with remarkable facility, while embracing a sense of responsibility. The realm does not belong to one person, but is the inheritance of all its people. Armed with erudition and eloquence, she defined herself not merely as a monarch, but as the Lady of the Peacock Throne, a symbol of power, independence, and grace. In matters of diplomacy and religion, Elizabeth chose a path of prudent tolerance. She refused to restore Roman Catholicism as Mary I had, yet did not adopt Edward VI's extreme reforms. Her policy of the marriage in reserve allowed her to preserve her autonomy against pressure to wed a European potentate. Simultaneously, she enacted the Act of Uniformity to establish a middle way for worship, encouraging acceptable religious freedom to heal the divisions of previous reigns. On the international stage, Elizabeth I skillfully employed diplomacy and naval power to elevate England's standing. She commissioned Sir Francis Drake's circumnavigation, placing England on the new global map. She funded fleets that triumphed over Spain in the year 1588. These accomplishments not only solidified England's position against Spanish hegemony, but also ignited national pride and a hunger for maritime exploration. Elizabeth I's greatest legacy is the Elizabethan culture, the golden age of poetry, theatre, and the arts. Under her patronage, William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson produced masterpieces, and the Globe Theatre resounded with applause. Public architecture featured elaborate facades and intricate carvings, bestowing London with its distinctive elegance. Whitehall and Hampton Court became enduring symbols of power and civilization, marking the prosperity of her reign. The enduring lesson of Elizabeth I lies in balancing authority with personal independence. She stood as a figurehead of female rule in a male-dominated era, and demonstrated that astute leadership rests on knowledge, tolerance, and strategic vision. Elizabeth understood that a stable throne depends upon the people's loyalty and religious harmony, never upon fire and sword alone. Her journey from a dispossessed princess to the lady of the peacock throne resonates through the ages. Power must be paired with wisdom, faith with compassion, and flexible diplomacy can propel a nation to greatness. On quiet London nights, as incense drifts from St. Paul's Cathedral, the spirit of Elizabeth I echoes still, reminding us that even amid stormy seas, independence and humanity remain the guiding lights for every generation. Please join me in uncovering the untold story of King Henry VIII's only acknowledged illegitimate son, Prince Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond. A life brief yet deeply revealing about power and bloodline. Henry Fitzroy was born in the year 1502 in the humble household of Elizabeth Blount, an aristocratic lady, but not a queen. The news that King Henry VIII formally recognized the infant spread through the royal court like thunder. The monarchy concealed no secret, instead bestowing upon him titles and privileges openly. The newborn was swiftly created Duke of Richmond in the year 1508, at the tender age of 6, to affirm his distinct station between legitimate and illegitimate offspring. From the moment of his investiture, the court's intentions were clear. Rumour held that Henry VIII once contemplated making his bastard son King of Ireland to tighten control over that island. In practice, Fitzroy was appointed to high offices, Knight of the Garter and Lord Lieutenant of Cornwall even as a child, revealing extraordinary favour. Vast lands and generous revenues from estates across England meant that the boy could be treated much like a true prince. Yet the relationship between Henry Fitzroy and his royal father was marked by both affection and distance. It was said that whenever Henry VIII gazed upon his son's bright countenance, he was struck by the weighty implications of bloodline. Though he loved Fitzroy, the king could not acknowledge him as the rightful heir to the throne, for that would have severely unsettled both church and nobility. The discretionary withholding or granting of succession rights left the young duke with a nameless loneliness in his heart. Fitzroy's life grew more tragic as his vitality quickly waned under the burden of illness. In the year 1509, just as he celebrated his 17th birthday, the Duke of Richmond fell victim to pulmonary tuberculosis, the invisible enemy of Tudor times. From Whitehall to Greenwich, every physician, cleric, and local healer was summoned to his bedside to pray and treat him, but the sickness would not relent. On that fateful night, high fever seized him in his final hour, and Fitzroy closed his eyes in the anxious embrace of his royal father and the assembled court. Henry Fitzroy's funeral was brief and unadorned, lacking the grand procession befitting a legitimate prince. His simple coffin was placed in Westminster Abbey, beside the resting places of Henry VII's infant children. There were no elaborate monuments, only dying embers of incense and hastily uttered prayers, as if the court preferred to veil its sorrow. Fitzroy's burial location was recorded only faintly, leaving an inexplicable void in the chronicles of history. Politicians and historians later cited Fitzroy's case as an example of Henry VIII's policy regarding bloodline. Though it was clear that an illegitimate son could not inherit, the king still granted him every honour and privilege, so that people would remember, in the Tudor view, deviant blood still deserved respect. This attitude suggested a certain openness in the royal succession, but underscored that lawful lineage could not be lightly disregarded. The impact of Fitzroy's story on Henry VIII's own approach to succession was profound. His son's premature death left a void in the king's heart, serving as a stark warning. Only a lawful heir could secure a stable throne. Thereafter, Henry VIII grew ever more anxious to produce a legitimate successor, willing to sever personal bonds to safeguard the bloodline. In his great divorces and subsequent marriages, he consistently placed the demand for a surviving prince above all else, ready to sacrifice personal happiness to prevent a recurrence of such tragic loss. The tale of Prince Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond, stands as testament to Henry VIII's relentless ambition and inner turmoil. A son born outside wedlock yet cherished and honoured, suddenly gone, leaving a wound of regret. Fitzroy's brief journey helped shape the king's uncompromising succession policies and etched into history the lesson that even acknowledgement cannot render a bloodline immune to its fragile fate. Please join me as we delve into the most painful mysteries of the Tudor court, the series of failed pregnancies and unnamed infants lost in an instant, to understand how the recurring spectre of life and death haunted the families of Henry VII and Henry VIII. Under both King Henry VII and his successor Henry VIII, the court recorded at least 4 pregnancies ending in miscarriage or stillbirth. The first, an unnamed princess who died in utero. The second and third, similar tragedies of frail fetuses arriving silent. And the fourth, when Princess Elizabeth of York herself endured a perilous birth that could not preserve the child. Childbearing in Tudor times was fraught with peril, as disease and primitive obstetrics meant that at least 1/3 of royal women experienced such heartbreak. Although these little angels existed only on paper, the court nonetheless held miniature funeral rites for each. The tiny remains were loosely wrapped in ivory white linen and placed in small wooden coffins, adorned with pale pink or blue ribbons according to presumed sex. The private chapel hosted brief vigil services, where bishops and royal nurses read prayers for the pure souls. Slender wooden markers inscribed, "Unnamed Princess, born date, died date," stood beside each coffin, affirming that every child merited remembrance. The nurses and court attendants not only cared for the grieving mother, but meticulously documented every detail. The fetus's weight, the moment the heart ceased to beat, and each whispered prayer. They were the silent witnesses, changing linens, lighting candles, and monitoring the final breath of each tiny life. Later court historians relied on these nurses' journals to grasp the Queen's emotional state, overwhelming mourning mixed with fragile hope each time her belly stirred. Psychologically, this pattern of loss fueled a relentless life and death anxiety within the royal family. Henry VII watched his firstborn depart almost as soon as he arrived. Elizabeth of York endured constant peril with each pregnancy, and Prince Henry the future. Henry VIII grew up amid uncertainty about whether he would ever stand upon the throne. No matter how strong the Queen appeared, she too was terror-stricken, confiding in chaplains about heavenly protection and wondering why such pure spirits vanished. Each miscarriage and stillbirth did more than wound hearts, it shaped court health policy and ritual. Royal physicians such as Master Rugeley were commissioned to trial every remedy, from peppermint cooling draughts to herbal cordials imported from the continent, hoping to sustain the unborn. Concurrently, the court staged a custos reliquiae procession, bearing a sacred relic beside a temporary altar to invoke divine safeguarding for both mother and child. The expense for each failed pregnancy was recorded in the royal accounts with no small sums, from £50 to £300, equivalent to the annual salary of a junior courtier. These outlays covered medical treatments, storage of embryonic remains, fees for the nursing staff, and offerings to the chaplain. Such figures reveal the court's insistence on precise record-keeping and its perpetual state of medical readiness each trimester. These micro-memorials became a court custom. Whenever the Queen's womb showed movement, attendants stood ready to erect a temporary shrine in the corridor and perform the small funeral rites. This practice underscored that even a life unbirthed was deemed an essential link in the Tudor bloodline. Ultimately, this sequence of losses propelled Henry VIII throughout his subsequent marriages. Each report of his wife's pregnancy filled him with greater urgency than any battlefield dispatch. The dread of another failed birth and lost infant drove him to dismiss wives, sever ties with the Roman Church, and sanction executions, all in search of the miracle of a surviving prince. In retrospect, we see that these unborn and newborn children formed the first fragments of Tudor tragedy. Each loss, however slight, ingrained the fear of fragile existence and the political necessity of an heir. No matter how mighty the court, it could not forestall the withering of a tiny life. And that is why every ceremony, every medical experiment, and every lavish expenditure revolved around a single question. Could the dynasty be preserved against history's unyielding demands? Let us reflect on the profound legacy bequeathed by the Tudor dynasty, a fusion of obsession with succession and humanistic lessons on life and death etched across generations of the British royal family. The dread of securing an heir shadowed the court from Henry VII through Henry VIII. Each time a young life was lost, anxiety over the fragility of the Tudor bloodline surged anew. This fear gave rise to the law of male preference primogeniture. Sons, however young, inherit before daughters. Though severe, this rule became the foundational principle guiding every royal marriage and even later succession disputes. That psychological preoccupation with succession extended far beyond the Tudor era, through the Stuart and Hanover dynasties, and into today's House of Windsor. Whenever a princess or queen took the throne, the court revisited inheritance laws and legitimacy. Royal marriages were arranged with painstaking care to secure a surviving son, from the wife of James I to Queen Victoria's dynastic strategies. In every negotiation, priority was always given to strengthening the male line. Alongside legal measures, ritual and memory played a pivotal role in maintaining the monarchy's image. After the Tudors, royal funerals continued to be held in solemn splendour at Westminster Abbey, with incense curling through hallowed aisles and ceremonial music filling the air. Trumpeters, choirs, and the royal orchestra not only paid homage to past sovereigns, but also reinforced the public's reverence. In every royal burial ground, each tombstone and relief inscription recorded the names of the departed, reminding future generations of the family's origins and tragedies. The three little angels of Henry VII, Elizabeth, Edmund, and Catherine lacked grand monuments, yet they are remembered through inscriptions, paintings, and small relics. On the walls of Westminster Abbey, simple stone carvings bear Latin prayers for their souls. In royal archives, the grand Flemish family portrait continues to tell the story of three youthful faces extinguished too soon, leaving an irreplaceable void. From these memorials, we extract a primal lesson about power and compassion. Royal politics cannot be divorced from family ties. The execution of a queen, the break with the papacy, the shifting marriages all stemmed from the obsession with bloodline and the fear of losing an heir. Yet this fear turned to slaughter and division, hardening the court. Memory and mercy, in contrast, are the only true balm for a dynasty's wounds. That is why post-Tudor monarchs, however stern, commissioned memorial altars, held remembrance services, and launched tomb restoration campaigns. They understood that securing the throne demands not only strict laws, but also embracing the past with compassion. When night falls and moonlight drifts over Westminster's spire, the image of all 7 Tudors, 4 who survived and 3 who perished, remains vivid in the national memory. The Tudor bloodline was as fragile as silk in a political storm, yet through remembrance and mercy that dynasty endured and continued. The tale of infant tragedies and succession anxieties teaches us that power may be awe-inspiring, but only human kindness endures forever. And now, as our journey through the tumultuous pages of Tudor history gradually draws to a close, we can relax our spirits and listen to the breath of time. The tragedies born of power struggles, the fragility of a royal bloodline, and the fleeting hopes for a newborn child meeting the dawn, all have passed, leaving us with a profound message. No matter how grand life may be, it is forever intertwined with our shared humanity and compassion. In this calm space, allow the glittering images of palace splendor to soften and give way to the warm light of hope. We come to understand that, however majestic power may be, only human kindness can heal the wounds of 3 little angels, the wounds of a harsh dynasty. From the stories of Henry VII, Henry VIII, and their tear-stained children, we learn that memory and mercy are the guiding lamps that illuminate even the darkest paths. So before we bring today's tale to a close, take a deep breath and exhale slowly, letting go of all burdens and anxieties. Let the tolling of Westminster's bells, the faint scent of court incense, and those Latin prayers drift through your mind like a gentle breeze through leaves, carrying peace into every corner of your heart. The message we carry forward is not merely the history of one dynasty, but a timeless value. Power is not meant to divide, but to protect, and bloodline is not meant to separate, but to unite. This is the spiritual gift the Tudor forebears bequeath to us, a reminder that, however resplendent a monarchy may stand, empathy and humanity are its most enduring foundations. And, as night falls and the first star peeks into view, let your soul settle into tranquility. I wish you a truly restful sleep, filled with gentle dreams where the 3 little Tudor angels cradle you in the soft melodies of the past. If you have enjoyed this voyage through time, please subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss the latest and greatest stories we have in store. Good night, and until we meet again on our next evening of storytelling.